Monday, August 17th, 2020 at 1:30. We're broadcasting this meeting on WCOT as well as online at www.talgov.com. This meeting is being executed virtually as authorized pursuant to the Governor's Executive Order number 20-69, which was most recently extended by Executive Order 20-179. Public comment desired to be made during the meeting may be submitted to the CRTPA's website at www.crtpa.org. Comments that have been received by 5 p.m. Friday, August 14th, 2020, have been placed on this meeting's agenda webpage and provided to CRTPA members. Any comments received after that time will be accepted and included as part of the official record of this meeting. All right, Greg.
All right,
Yes.
let's call to order and roll call.
Commissioner Barfield? I think I'm muted.
No, we can hear you.
Okay, Commissioner Barfield?
Present.
Commissioner Merritt?
Here.
Commissioner Villa-BCA?
Here.
Commissioner Deloge?
In the Wakulla County Jail, yes.
Commissioner Dozier?
I'm here, and please disregard anything the previous speaker said.
Commissioner Maddox? Commissioner Minor?
Present.
Commissioner Matlow?
I'm here.
Commissioner Richardson?
Here.
And Commissioner Williams-Cox?
I'm here.
Thank you.
Are there any public comments filled out?
Commissioner Merritt, we did receive a significant amount of public comment related to item 6A today. That was forwarded to you all. All the comments that we received actually from around 9 through 9:30 p.m. Friday were forwarded to you about 10:08 Friday evening. We've also received about a dozen or so more comments over the weekend and today, and we'll submit those as part of the record as well.
Okay. I guess we'll move on to consent then, right, Greg?
Yes, sir.
Is there a motion on consent?
So move.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. We need a roll call vote.
Yes, we've been doing it by roll call just to keep it clean.
Okay. Commissioner Barfield?
Aye.
Commissioner Merritt?
Aye.
Commissioner Villa-BCA?
Aye.
Commissioner Deloge?
Aye.
Commissioner Dozier?
Aye.
Commissioner Minor?
Aye.
Commissioner Matlow?
I heard an aye there, a faint one.
Commissioner Richardson?
Aye.
Commissioner Williams-Cox?
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, on to item 6, I just want to note that the m.cores update is not an action item, so there is no vote required, none requested. So Greg, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of months ago, the board requested an update on the m.cores project, in particular the Suncoast Connector. Chris Edmondson from DOT is here with us today to provide an update. And as Chairman Merritt said, we had no action set for this item today. It's simply an update on the progress of the task force. So Chris, with that, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Greg. Let me see if I can share the presentation.
Mr. Chairman, while Chris is doing that, can I ask, when are we expected to take action on this?
I don't know. Greg, are we going to take a position on m.cores or?
I think that's ultimately up to the board. I know there has been some changes on the timelines. So why don't we let Chris go through the presentation and we can talk about it afterwards.
Okay.
And I note for the record that Commissioner Big Maddox has joined us. So for purposes of roll call, Yolanda, if you can make sure that Joan is present.
Gotcha.
All right, can everybody see the screen?
Yes.
Yep.
All right. So, well, as Greg mentioned, my name is Chris Edmonston. I'm with the Florida Department of Transportation. I've been working with the m.cores program since it was signed into law back in May of 2019. So I'm here today to give you a general update of the progress that's been made through the task force process. So getting right into it, I'll just give you a little bit of background. The m.cores, the department's been assigned with the Assembling Task Forces to study 3 specific proposed corridors. This is a statewide look. Obviously, you can see the Suncoast, which is what I believe this group would be most interested in, is this northernmost study area. So the Suncoast study area runs from Citrus County to Jefferson County. It's about 150 miles of area to study. I'm just going to mention the other 2 just for the knowledge of the group. The Northern Turnpike is about 40 miles and it extends from the northern terminus of Florida's Turnpike northwest to meet up with the Suncoast Parkway. And then in southwest Florida from Collier to Polk County, we have the Southwest Central Florida corridor. That length is about 150 miles as well. So looking at our dates that were assigned to us in the legislation, obviously I mentioned it was May 17th, 2019 is when the bill was signed into law by the governor with an effective date of July 1st, 2019. Task force members were appointed on August 1st of 2019, and the report is due November 15th, 2020. If deemed feasible, construction would begin by December 31st, 2022, with construction completed by December 31st of 2030. As I mentioned, all those dates were in the bill that was signed back in May of 2019. So just to give some background on activities to date, we've had a total of 6 meetings so far with some webinars. After the COVID-19 pandemic hit, we had to kind of regroup our approach. In August of 2019, we held a joint kickoff meeting of all 3 task forces. The task force members received an introduction to the m.cores program and background information on FDOT's transportation corridor planning and development process. At this meeting, the task force roles and responsibilities were established, as well as the expected task force work products. The meeting concluded with task force members identifying considerations for future discussions and meetings. And also, I wanted to point out at this meeting, Senate President Galvano and FDOT Secretary Tebow addressed the task forces to kick the meeting off. So since then, Task Force Meeting 2, we had our second round held in October of 2019. This is where the members were introduced to the approach of identifying avoidance, minimization, mitigation, and enhancement considerations. FDOT also has developed interactive GIS tools for each of the corridors to show a number of study area data. These tools were shared with the task force members, and the members also identified some additional data that they would like to include in the tool, which we have since done. During the meeting, the task force members identified potential principles for avoidance and minimization. At meeting number 3, which was in December of 2019, the task force reviewed the corridor planning and project development process, as well as the corridor purpose as identified in statute. Task force members identified regional and local needs based on study area conditions. In response to task force members' request to hear expert opinions, we put together a panel of subject matter experts in environmental, community, and economic resources. Following the panel discussion, the task force members identified avoidance, minimization, mitigation, and enhancement considerations for community and economic resources. At the 4th task force meeting, which was held in February of this year, task force members participated in a subject matter expert panel discussion on economic and workforce development opportunities. Members received a presentation from the Department of Economic Opportunity that reviewed the local government comp plans in the study area, as well as regional and community visions. They discussed how these plans relate to our corridor planning process. And the task force members reviewed the corridor planning process, including an overview of how we analyze traffic and what our methodology is for that, as well as the alternative corridor evaluation process. The task force at this meeting started to draft guiding principles and identify additional avoidance areas. So task force meeting number 5 was held in March. As you know, that's when we started to feel the effects of the COVID pandemic. The task force had a panel discussion on corridor utility needs and opportunities, as well as discussed the draft high-level needs summary. They reviewed additional data requested by the task force and reviewed existing and baseline forecasted traffic data. And finally, they discussed existing corridor enhancement opportunities. So as I mentioned, due to the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, the need to comply with the executive order from the governor caused the Northern Turnpike and Suncoast Task Force meetings basically to be canceled. So the task force members received the presentations and materials virtually. Since then, from April to June, the task force met through 4 webinars and virtual meetings. Through these meetings, the task force discussed the process for identifying avoidance and attraction areas as input for task force recommendations. They also participated in panel discussions with subject matter experts on emerging technology trends and broadband, and continued to refine the high-level needs and guiding principles. At task force meeting number 6, we held this in July. The task force has resumed their regularly scheduled meetings. They met virtually through GoToWebinar, but we did hold 2 public viewing locations in each study area for members of the public to watch the meetings and provide in-person public comment if they choose to do so. At the meeting, the task force established initial consensus on its high-level needs, discussed and refined the draft guiding principles, discussed draft instructions for project development, and then reviewed the draft report outline and report drafting process. Our next meeting, which is going to be held next week, you can see the dates at the top here on the and locations on this slide. The meetings are going to be held virtually, but there will again be 2 locations set up for public viewing in each study area. The task forces are going to discuss how their recommendations are going to be used to identify and narrow down the path course. The members are going to receive an update on the recommendations framework and work plan. And the task forces are going to establish an initial consensus on guiding principles and discuss draft instructions for project development. The task forces are going to review draft report sections with a focus on high-level needs. And also we're going to resume community open houses in each study area to share updates on the task force process and receive additional public comments. You can see those dates and locations are also shown on the slide. So moving towards meetings number 8 and 9, we anticipate having 2 more meetings. So we're targeting the weeks of September 21st and October 26th. The September meeting, we want to review and refine the draft task force report. And then at meeting number 9, we hope to adopt the final task force report. So throughout the process, public engagement has been a critical component. You can see here all the opportunities that we provide for public engagement. We have public comment, obviously, at every task force meeting. Once the draft recommendations are released, we're going to have a public comment period in September and October of 2020. Continue to hold community open houses, briefings such as this to regional and local partner organizations. And then, of course, we have our Florida m.cores website that accepts communication 24/7 and via email at f.listens, phone, and social media. So just to highlight the project development process that the department is going to be going through for m.cores, it ranges from all the way from the task forces through construction, where currently undergoing the task force process, which is step 1. And we're initiating the planning and corridor evaluation process, which is step 2. After that, we'll move into PD&E and design and acquire right-of-way and go to construction. I want to point out the statutorily required dates of December 31st, 2022 to begin construction, and the corridors will be open to traffic no later than December 31st, 2030. As always, we like to highlight, the department likes to highlight our Vision Zero safety movement. So, you know, our goal, obviously, you can see the statistics here from 2018 for traffic fatalities, pedestrian fatalities, bicycle and motorcycle fatalities in the state of Florida. Obviously, safety is number 1 to the department, and obviously, we have the goal of 0 fatalities in the state. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Edmondson, thank you very much for your time and for coming to present to us today. I appreciate it. There are 2 highly respected organizations, Florida Tax Watch and Thousands Friends of Florida, that have expressed some grave concerns about m.cores and specifically about the Suncoast Connector. Both of them have expressed concerns about the fact that they state there's no needs analysis that's been conducted yet. You know, why are we doing this? You know, people, many of the comments that have come to us, and I'm sure you've heard the same thing, Highway 27 and 19 are very lightly used relative to what the expectations are for m.cores for the Suncoast corridor. What's the current and anticipated need for this?
So, yeah, sure. No, it's a good question. So we have not evaluated the need yet. That's done at a later point in the development process. The needs will be evaluated as we go into our PD&E phase. So that's just going to happen at a later date. They'll determine if the projects are financially feasible at that point.
Well, that's one thing that Florida Tax Watch had suggested is that, you know, they expressed concern about, since there's no financial feasibility study, which is required by state law, how can we commit as a state to spending millions, hundreds of millions of dollars on the PD&E, on the planning phase? Can you speak to that? Because from what Florida Tax Watch knows what they're doing. And then when they say that, you know, this is not compliant with state law, how would FDOT respond to that?
Well, you know, I can't answer that their concern. I saw their report. I can't answer that directly. You know, I would say that, you know, we will determine financial feasibility of the projects. That's really the best way I can answer that.
Do you know at what point you would? Because I just, you know, it seems to me we'd want to front load that work, determine if it's number one, if there's a need for it, number one, if there's a financial viability toward it that can warrant and justify the taxpayer dollars being spent on PD&E. I think those 2 things should be done first before we commit ourselves to hundreds of $millions on the 3 corridors.
Yeah, I appreciate your comment, and I don't have a specific timeline at this point, and so I will certainly circle back with any additional information that I get.
Do you know what the Alachua County Commission did last week?
No, sir.
They voted unanimously to on a no build option for m.cores.
Right.
I don't know if they did that via a letter or a resolution, but they made that choice unanimously last week. There's a wide variety of organizations in this state, many of them very respectable, very credible, that are often at opposing ends of the spectrum on many other issues. But on this issue, on m.cores, they seem to have a common thread of concern about not having a needs analysis or a feasibility study before we start moving forward in a very big and very expensive way. And so I know this is not an actionable item for us today, but I do want to take a harder look at, as as CRTPA on whether or not we would want to support this going forward. When Alachua County has a unanimous vote of do not proceed, when you have Florida Tax Watch, when you have Thousand Friends of Florida, organizations I highly respect, have great concerns about it, and when you have the amount of public input universally against this, it gives me a great amount of concern. And so one thing I'd like to propose to the CRTPA right now is to have this come back at our next meeting to make a more informed decision on what position we'd like to take as a board. That would be my motion today, and I hope there might be a second.
I don't think there's a motion. It's a non-action item.
Well, it's up to us as a board. We can make a motion on this item, even though there's not an action required from us today.
Mr. Chairman,
I
I'd like
would second the motion.
Randy, hey, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Hey, and in full disclosure, I'm doing some work with Atkins, and I've consulted with the county attorney and the CRTPA attorney, and there's no conflict. I'd like to hear from Commissioner Barfield and Commissioner Dozier, who were on this task force, and frankly, their job is to get us to a point where then we can start deciding where this goes. I think we're a little premature to start to be against something where we don't even know what it's doing. And there are plenty of other organizations that are for it. So it's a planning process. And as Chris pointed out, let the plan run its course, and then we can decide what it looks like. I think a lot of people are jumping the gun and saying, I don't like it. And I understand the financial argument, but this is the first time in my lifetime that we've had a chance to do some transportation planning out in a real way forward, which is pretty forward thinking. I'm a little hesitant to start trying to have an opinion on it until we know what it looks like and where it is.
Chris Rico is also on that board. Right.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that. Okay, so one of the three of them, or all three of them, certainly who are in the process, who've been to the meetings and understand it intimately better than any of us, I'd welcome their input.
Kristen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can jump in now. I wasn't sure if Betsy or Chris were in the queue there. Well, I guess I'm going to step back for just a second and say to our other, Chris Edmondson, thank you for the presentation. And I know you've heard me say this a few times. I hope you have. FDOT and our consultants, I mean, you've done a fantastic job. This was something mandated from the legislature, approved by the governor. We were all handed a process that we had to carry out. And then you add COVID on top of that. It's been exceptionally challenging. Commissioner Deloge, to your point just now, I have actually celebrated through this process, having attended almost all of the meetings. One of them overlapped with our special meeting on the mask mandate, so I didn't attend that meeting. But all of the others, if you haven't seen the GIS map that's been developed and includes a lot of information from Citrus all the way north through Jefferson County, it is an incredible tool. We haven't had all this information in one place and could really help us with transportation planning, land use, and other things in the future. It's something that Appalachia Regional Planning Council has worked on, Appalachia Online, for our other, for our region. So there's some good elements of this. My concern, and Commissioner Minor, you went to a couple of these pieces, this does feel a little backwards. Not that we should question long-term planning in the future. I mean, doing that early on, I welcome that. But to start with a suggestion of a toll road to kind of get there, and I know we can look at existing infrastructure, we can look at other things, but we've really had to ask those questions and refine that throughout the year. Again, our FDOT staff has been great, but I think for a lot of us sitting on the task force, we feel like we should have looked at the transportation needs in general and all of these other aspirational targets, workforce, broadband, things like that, and then gotten to what is the best solution for that? Is it a new road? Is it a bypass? Is it improving existing? So I don't question the long-term planning, but I question the suggestion that there's a toll road that's needed before we go through this exercise. I think this has also gotten complicated. This is the last thing I'll say here, and then I might chime back in a few minutes. But and I've shared this with a lot of the folks who have emailed us. I've been hearing from them throughout my time on m.cores, and they've really done an incredible job digging into this project. But we go through a meeting where we're working on guiding principles, and then almost all the public comment is no build, and it seems very disjointed. We got an email from Neil Fleckenstein at Tall Timbers, and he's been working with Tax Watch and others. I really think for our purposes now or at a next meeting, if Commissioner Minor and Richardson's motion is going to pass, the question for me comes down to how this impacts current and future transportation projects, not just in relation to the COVID impact on our budget, but if you look at some of that Tax Watch information that Neil and others have put out, Tax Watch has, and then he has it in his email, we could really harm ourselves in the future transportation projects and maintaining existing if we put all of our eggs in one basket. And the other thing is the timeline. I think the timeline in the statute is too aggressive, particularly in light of COVID. And we should push the legislature and the governor to change how the statute is working so that we have more time to go through this planning and make sure the need is there and we have the funding to do this. We don't want to do a bunch of planning and then have it sit on the shelf for 10 years because we don't have the money. It would be a wasted effort. So again, Mr. Chair, I've got a couple of other more specific thoughts or questions, but since you prompted us on just general ideas about m.cores, and as the person who asked for the presentation, I just wanted to say those things up front, and I'll turn it over to Chris or Betsy if they have other thoughts about, our service on the task force.
Betsy, do you want to add anything to that?
Sure, I would like to. Thank you very much. And as a commissioner that represents Jefferson County, and we have voted to continue to stay in the mix at least until we see the lines on the map. And I would ask that this board would follow lead with that. It's difficult to vote on something until you see the lines on the map. And I think at that time it'd be appropriate for us to take a vote. I don't believe it's appropriate for us to have this vote sitting on the table right now without public notice. I know unless it's an emergency item, and I know in our meetings we follow Robert's Rules of Order and we don't do it that way. So I would ask that if this board does have the notion to move forward on a vote on the excuse me, on where we lie on this subject matter, I would definitely put that out as a regular agenda item to be voted on. It is not appropriate for us to vote on that today. And I could tell you that it's been a very contentious process that every one of us have been through, particularly if you're an elected commissioner sitting on that board. I do want to say that what we're doing, as everybody knows, is we're following Florida statutes, like it or not. Please remember that there are quite a few hurdles that this process has got to go through before we even commit money to it, to build it out. And those are some very huge hurdles. And I just don't know if from what it looks like right now with Jefferson County piece of it, it's going to be co-located on the 1927 corridor. I don't know that for sure because I haven't seen the lines on the map, but that's coming down pretty quickly. So I would say that hold the line on that until we can see what it's going to happen. And as with what Christian said, the information has been incredible that has come down through this process. DOT has been an amazing partner with this. again, through Florida statutes, we're having to do it. And there's a lot of us that don't want to do it, but I would say that you're better at the table right now, working with the DOT, working with your legislatures, and trying to figure out. And I do have to remind you that we can sit here and we can vote for a no build, but that would be a consideration for DOT. That they definitely take that into consideration, but that doesn't mean that you won't get a no build.
Just to clarify something,
Chair,
I
on point.
believe the motion was to bring it back at the next meeting, not to vote on it today.
Mr. Chair, that's correct. I would not propose a vote on something of this magnitude right now without public notice. So my motion was to bring it back at the next meeting when we have a chance to take a look at the pros and cons, decide whether or not we want to make a position on this, and then go forward at the next meeting. But this would be properly noticed for the next meeting's agenda. And I think Commissioner Richardson seconded that motion under that understanding.
Yes, and thank you. I stand corrected on that, but I still stand with my thought that until you see the lines on the map, perhaps you might want to hold tight and follow lead. I think that would be wise. It sure would be respectful to all the work that's been done with DOT. Again, that's coming down from leadership in the legislature, and we're just like everybody on this Zoom call. We're all trying to navigate this, and it's a time bomb. It really is, and it hasn't been fun, but it is very important that we step lightly and we step carefully, and we are thoughtful about our vote and how we're going to proceed forward. I could say that while I'm not having fun on it, it is an honor to serve on a committee like this and to have input and influence on how that goes down. Let's see what else. So we're going to have over in Jefferson County over here, we're going to have a turnover on our board, and I'm pretty sure I know what's going to happen then. They might change their mind about it, how they're going to vote on the toll road. But at the minimum, I would ask that you wait until your election, your general election comes through to actually take a vote on it. Some of the seats, unfortunately, might be overturned to somebody new, and their opinion might be something different. So at the minimum, at least wait until your elections are over with in November. And I would ask that you just hold the line for right now until we can get the lines on the map.
Chris, did you want to add anything since you're also on the m.core board? Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have anything else to add other than I think we all realize that DOT has been put in a very difficult position with this legislation. And I certainly understand Commissioner Dozier's and Commissioner Barfield's concerns on this. So it has been very difficult. And I think everyone has the same underlying questions, but I think I would agree maybe some patience would help. That's all I have.
All right, Commissioner Minor, is your motion the same?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think based on Commissioner Barfield's comments and Commissioner Dozier's and Mr. Reithaus, I think if Commissioner Richardson would be amenable to it as the seconder of the motion, I would change the date of this agenda item coming back till after the November election.
Curtis?
I would consent to that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, can I?
Kick the can down the road a little ways. Go ahead, Kristen.
Thank you. Did you have someone else in queue? I didn't mean to.
Yeah, I had my.
I don't have a queue. Curtis?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, I am not a whole lot familiar with this m.cores project. I am certainly not familiar with how the need for it was established and how we got there before we established it and a law be passed that we have to abide by. That's ridiculous. I served in the legislature for 8 years and we never did anything like this. And certainly to do it and not involve local communities. I mean, we see all the input that we've gotten where already people are saying they don't want it. They're questioning how we're going to pay for this. If we look at where we are now, I forgot how many billions they said, we're going to be projected to have to cut from the state budget. Toll roads in the past have not met projected revenue estimates. And this may be the case here. The environmental impact, how will it impact, you know, our rural communities here in North Florida environmentally? I just don't understand how we've gotten, well, you know, the legislature can do that, and certainly the governor signed it into law, but it just does not make sense at all to me that we would be where we are now without already having established a need for this. And it may be in South Florida, but I certainly have not seen the transportation need for this through Southwest and North Florida, for sure. The other question that I had is, what is the CRTPA's role in this? If we said we were going to do a resolution opposing it, I mean, what would that do? It won't change the law. The legislature isn't going to amend the law. So what is our role in all of this as a CRTPA? I just have not seen anything like this, especially during all the time that I served in the legislature, where a law was passed like this before there was even a need established and without involving local communities. So I have a lot of reservations about it. I would be certainly willing, I mean, because we have no other choice, to follow Commissioner Barfield's lead and what she's suggesting. But you know, I've just been involved in too many of these projects, even especially through Blueprint. Look what we went through with the Northeast Gateway project. And that's kind of sounds like where we are with this. And I don't want communities coming back to us when we don't have a role in it. I mean, we're already getting input. We've gotten all of these emails. Those should have gone to their legislators, to their House members and their senators, not the CRTPA, but we got them because people apparently think we have a role in this, in the decision-making process, and we don't. But we're getting that kind of feedback, and I'm telling you, it's not going to get any easier as this thing starts to move forward and people see where the lines are being drawn and what the routes are. It's not going to get easier. It's going to get worse. But I'm willing to wait until December. I have some real serious reservations about this. And if it came to a vote, I would vote no. But I'm willing to hang on until something more definitive comes to us in December. And if nothing else, we can take a position on it as a board. So those are my few comments.
Curtis, piggybacking on what you said, and Greg, you can take to this, is us taking a position on it, inserting ourselves in the process when we're not in the process. We're not being consulted. We're not being asked if we like it or dislike it. I'm just a little hesitant to take a position at all on something we don't have a stake in.
Well, Mr. Chairman, actually we do. I mean, you know, we were assigned a role on the advisory committee that Commissioner Dozier filled, and also too, this project, you know, goes through part of our planning area in Jefferson County. So we do actually have a role. Ultimately, you know, the decision, and this is one that's very unique, you know, and I'll go back to touch on what Commissioner Minor said. You know, there's a pretty set process that transportation projects go through, and especially those ones that involve tolls. This one is very unique, as a couple of folks have pointed out, in the fact that the legislature, in essence, has put this into law that this be built. Yeah. Following their processes. So there's probably some significant legal questions there, but I don't think we want to get into those today. I would agree. I think we're better off to wait. You know, as a transportation planner, when I look at the question of need, especially in the northern part of the corridor, again, US 27 and 19 have a significant amount of excess capacity. You know, we may see something where there's a toll facility that's maybe built further to the south, but there are some enhancements made to 19 and 27 that we probably wouldn't want to let pass by if we have that opportunity. I do think it's smart to wait until we see exactly what comes to fruition. I would hate to get out in front of something and oppose it. Number one, we don't know exactly what it is. And number two, if there's a possibility that we would derive some benefit from it in the future, I think the prudent course is to wait and kind of see what comes through the process.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in. I strongly concur with Commissioner Richardson's comments, as well as Commissioner Minor. You know, we're not strangers to this sort of planning. It was asked, how can you be against something before you know what it is? But really, you should know what it is before you're for it. Kind of putting the cart before the horse here. It seems like very first step should always be if it's feasible, if there's a need for it. As we're talking about taxpayers' dollars, they give our state government, they give our local governments their trust for those tax dollars. And to not have a plan before we get to this stage, I recognize it's ridiculous that we're in this position right now. I recognize the reality of the situation that we've been put in. I appreciate everybody's hard work, Commissioner Barfield and others, but I mean, at some point, we have to take a stand and say, when taxpayer dollars are being spent, there needs to be a need for them before you even get to a stage like this. And if that's appropriate for this board to make that statement, I would support it, whether it comes up at the next meeting or in December.
Okay, so is there any other comments? We do have a motion on the floor.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you. Well, as Greg Slate just said, I represent CRTP on the board. I mean, we're unique where we had 3 task force members on our board. So I thought it was appropriate for us to get an update, a presentation, not necessarily anticipating we would take an action either in July or at this meeting, but as your representative, I really did want to hear what you all thought about this project. So I appreciate the time today. The other thing I'd say is I think there is something kind of caught in the middle here where Commissioner Barfield, I mean, I respect Betsy and you and others. We don't want to say no to investment in our region. North Central and North Florida, we have needed investment for a long time. I mean, most of us know we have worked for years to improve our relationship with FDOT. Our staff's doing a great job. I mean, we do want investment in Leon County, Tallahassee, and our whole region, in all of our counties. So I wouldn't support, and I've told the other groups that have emailed us, a no-build resolution. Commissioner Richardson, I mean, you said it quite well. What would a resolution do at this point? Mm-hmm. Commissioner Minor, you had mentioned Alachua. I actually was being asked to bring this up at the Leon County Commission, and I let folks know that I already had it teed up for CRTPA. I thought this was the appropriate place to have this discussion, whether we took action or not. So I think, again, this is more appropriate. Resolutions don't always have an impact, but here's the caveat, and I really would love to see this come back. The task force, and I and the others, we're going to stay engaged. I mean, we're focused on the guiding principles. We're talking about the existing infrastructure. That's in the guiding principles, assessing existing infrastructure to see if we should improve that instead of building a new road. These are good things. So I think we have some good work product and some good discussion coming out of the task force. For this board, we may want to focus on, and where it should be appropriate for everyone to focus on, the legislature and the governor. FDOT shouldn't be asked to do a no build. That's not Chris's decision or anyone else who's working in this. But if we come back in a month or two and say, we've got big concerns about the impact of this schedule that is in law and how that financial drain on the state, whether or not we could even cover it at this point, how it will impact current and future projects. We are told to go through long-term transportation planning. We check all our boxes with our private sector consultants, with FDOT. we need to make sure as a state, this is something for all counties and cities, that this project, one or all three phases, doesn't negatively impact us. And there may be, again, I'd cite Neil Fleckenstein's, the end of his email. If you look at that, he had some suggestions we may want to reflect on, asking the legislature to remove the timeline or extend the timeline, or to give us some additional information about the budget and the impact. That's really where I think CRTPA's interest is long-term. We don't want to have projects in our 5-year work plan or 10-year that can't be funded because all the money is going to a new toll road. Right. So I just wanted to leave it there, Mr. Chair. I would encourage us, and the draft report is due, or the report's due in November, so maybe that is the appropriate time to look at the report. I would not want to push it off any further than that, because this is going to be up for discussion in committees and in session, and our respective boards may want to take a position, or CRTPA might.
Commissioner, could you repeat your motion?
Yes, let me give you a quick wrap up. I'll say the motion. Basically, the motion was to have the m.cores agenda item come back to us after the November election. I guess December is probably the next meeting after that, where we would take a look at the current status, take a look at the needs analysis or lack of, the financial feasibility, and then make a decision. I tell you, if this motion passes, and we do discuss this in December, I don't know how I'm going to vote. My main concern, though, is about from very respected organizations that are expressing concerns about the way that this process is kind of backwards, and how we're being asked as a state to commit millions of dollars on planning and PDE before we really know the needs analysis and whether or not it's financially viable. So my reason for doing this motion is because of financial and fiscal stewardship. And since CRTPA does have a role, we have some of our members serving on the task force there. I think we have a role to play in how this moves forward and having a voice. So that was my motion, is to basically bring this back in December, where we can take a look at this. There'll be public notice then, and then whatever decision as a board we decide to make, whether it's a letter, resolution on any position, I think is something that's of our interest, as well as the taxpayers that would be spending this money going forward.
Curtis, is that okay with you? That's your.
Sounds good to me, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Williams, this was under action item, so we don't need a unanimous vote, right? Just a majority?
You can do it as a majority, or you can just do it as directive to staff.
Okay.
You don't actually have to vote on it.
Everyone okay with directing staff to bring it back in December then?
Well, we got the motion on the table.
I was about to say, why don't we, since there is a motion, let's just go ahead and vote it.
Are there any more comments then?
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question before we take the vote?
Absolutely.
What is it that we expect or anticipate that we will have more of in December to make a decision on? And I'm directing that question to Chris.
Are you asking me?
Well,
yes, I'm trying to, because you're the maker of the report, and so I'm assuming you would be the one that would be coming back with the report. What are we anticipating will happen between now and December to put our group in a position to take an action?
The report will be finalized by the time you meet in December, so you will have had the full report to review and analyze. It'll be done and sent to the legislature and the governor by November 15th. That is our deadline.
And will there, because I've heard some conversation about a feasibility study, will a feasibility study have been done as a part of that reporting?
No, ma'am. The report is going to outline the guiding principles that are going to help guide the PD&E process, essentially.
So my question is, what are we asking for then to come back in December that's going to give us more information to make a decision on our position?
Mr. Chair, if I might.
Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you. Commissioner Williams-Cox, I think the report could let us know, will let us know what the task force, how we agreed on the guiding principles. And as I said before, the guiding principles are kind of already shaping up to say things like, look at existing infrastructure first versus a new road. We could support that report. We could say we don't support it. But my thoughts, what I was trying to get to earlier, is the comments we may want to make on behalf of CRTPA in our 4-county region and all our cities might be more about how the state manages this budget and whether or not they stick to the current timeline that's in statute, given budget shortfall from COVID-19 and other things like that. There may be other things on the legislative side that we will know at that point and could reflect on, and quite bluntly, from my perspective, could have an impact on long-term transportation projects for us. So there may be nothing we want to vote on, but there will be more information at that time.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Dozier. My concern too is that if the report will be what the report will be sent to the legislature. They too are coming through an election and will not have their reorg meeting until, well, I guess it will happen in either December or early next year. So I'm really trying to figure out, what are we really doing? Are we just kicking the can down the road to get the finalized report, which is just really a report to the Florida legislature? And we have no jurisdiction or authority to make the legislature do anything, nor the governor. Are we just adding our name to the list of people who are saying we don't need it? So I'm trying to figure out, because I want to, since we must vote, I want to make sure that it makes sense to do that now, to do it in December. Today it may sound like a good idea, but what are we really going to have to vote on in December? And I understand that we could vote on the report, but the report is not to, the report is to the Florida legislature.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead. Go, Commissioner Dozier.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Williams-Cox, you're asking good questions. It's just another point in the process. And I guess what I didn't say earlier is there are other groups like Tax Watch that are assessing the impact of either Suncoast or one or all three of the corridors. So we may have more information on the economic impact on other types of things. This will have an impact on us if it's built as part of our region in Jefferson County, but also statewide budget and other things. So I'm apologize, Mr. Chair, if I'm repeating myself here, but Commissioner Williams-Cox, you are asking really good questions, and I don't think we know until we get to that point. But I am confident there's going to be an ask of the legislature this year, and we're going to hear from a lot of different associations, some we've already heard from and others. So at least having a placeholder on the agenda gives us time to dig into that if we want to comment on it.
Mr. Chair, real quick. Go ahead. And thank you. And Commissioner Williams-Cox, I mean, if this motion passes and we have this agenda item come to us in December, we can look at that agenda item, and the whole spectrum of options is available to us. Like I said, I don't know how I would vote in December after taking a look at the report that's going to be presented to the governor on November 15th. We need to take a look at that report. But there are a lot of questions raised by very credible organizations about the financial feasibility, the needs analysis, environmental impact. If this motion should pass, come November 15th, we'll have access to the report provided to the governor. We can take a look at all the work that's been done to date across the state. We can consider the financial feasibility importance, and then we can make a choice on what, as a board, we decide to do. If anything, we can send a message to the governor and legislature, please consider doing a financial feasibility study or needs analysis before you proceed. Now that COVID, the pandemic has affected us, should we reassess whether or not this is really the most important thing for us to do over the next several years? I mean, all those things, I think we have a voice. This is a very important thing for the state. Whether it gets built or not, it will have, it's going to have a big impact on us here in Tallahassee and within the CRTPA.
And I don't doubt, and I'm sorry, I don't doubt that. I'm just trying to figure out what are we actually going to be voting to do in December, because it sounds like the report that will be given may not come back with the financial feasibility, but we may get it from Tax Watch. So it sounds like this report alone won't be the only thing that we would need. We would need the other information that you're saying will come from other organizations. And I know that I know the impact of this area that it could have. I'm not questioning that. I'm just trying to question, what are we really, if we just want to bring an agenda item back for December, then let's just bring an agenda item back for December. And if that's going to be another update, then just let it be, just be another update. I think and maybe I'm thinking too simplistically, but I think we're putting too much energy on a report that's going to just give us some information that we can just get by having an agenda item to get the update like we did today.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
That's essentially my motion. My motion didn't request anything other than to have this agenda item come back to us in December. And it's fortuitous because it's timely because the report to the governor will be out to the public on November 15th. So basically, that's my motion, is having this come back in December. What we decide to do after that agenda item is presented to us in December is up to this board.
Okay, let's move on. We got a motion and a second. Can we do a roll call vote, please?
All right. Commissioner Barfield?
Aye.
Okay. Commissioner Merritt?
Aye.
Commissioner Villabisier?
He had to leave.
I believe he's gone.
Okay. Commissioner Deloge?
Aye.
Commissioner Dozier?
Aye.
Commissioner Maddox?
Aye.
Commissioner Minor?
Aye.
Commissioner Matlow?
Aye.
Commissioner Richardson?
Aye.
Commissioner Williams Cox?
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously.
All right, let's move on to something more fun. The Actions 2045.
Thank you.
Transportation's fine.
Yes. Chris, thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris. I don't know that I've ever heard an RMP referred to as fun, but I'm going to hand this off to Jack as he is overseeing the development of the 2045 RMP. So Jack, take it away.
Yeah, they don't call me Mr. Fun for nothing, so that's how I get this project. So with the long-range transportation plan, we've been kind of holding off on presenting a lot of information because we were kind of hoping that we'd be able to meet with you all in person and kind of walk you through some things that were a little bit more detailed. But we're kind of at a point where we can't wait anymore, and we've got to have some discussion about the process and where we're at and making sure that we're hitting our deadlines in November for adoption. So with that, we have a number of things that we're going to be presenting to you today. And with that, I will turn it over to Allison Flewitt and Kate Widness from Kimley Horn, and they'll present some information. And if you have questions, please feel free to ask.
Thanks, Jack. So can everyone see our presentation up right now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So things that we've completed so far for the 2045 Regional Mobility Plan is back in January, we brought those goals to you. Those goals really haven't changed much since the 2045 RMP. the definitions of those goals, some of those things were things like safety and connectivity, multimodalism, land use, have been massaged to incorporate more resilience and travel and tourism into those definitions. So that was brought back in January to you all. Then we started bringing forth some of the evaluation criteria, which Allison will expand upon in some of her slides, but that's really the screening tool for projects. Are project phases complete? Are they a part of an adopted plan? Are there significant natural or environmental, social environmental effects from these projects? So that evaluation is really a screening. And then we talked about the prioritization criteria. So those are things like safety, complementing bicycle and pedestrian, universal accessibility, and resilience. Then we talked about the beginning of the needs plan, which we'll go through shortly after this slide, as well as the previous public engagement efforts. That included several public workshops throughout all the 4 counties, as well as going to some local events like the last big event we had here, which was the Winterfest, which attracts people from all over our region, to try to hear from the public and have them, one, understand what a long-range transportation plan is, explain what we're trying to achieve for our, regional mobility plan here at the CRTPA, and get input from folks. So today's discussion items, like I said, we're going to go through the needs plan. We're going to take a look at those existing plus committed network, show you the prioritization criteria and how those projects really move forward to prioritize the projects that we have, discuss the project revenues, and start to discuss the estimated project costs. So the needs plan process, really, a needs plan is what is needed within your community. It merges previous planning efforts with data for anticipated growth within the region. So it really looks at safety, congestion, previous efforts, as well as public input. So what we're going to go through today are the roadway projects of the needs plan. And I think Allison wanted to touch a little bit upon how that has changed from 2040, where there was a much longer list.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. And I know that many of you all were involved in the 2040 process. And if you recall back then, what we were starting out with in that RMP was a fairly extensive list of roadway projects. And the reason for that is we kind of did a major update for our project at that point in time, and went back to the drawing board and took all the potential ideas and pulled them together. At that point, we were then able to start more of the critical assessment of those projects, really understanding which ones were kind of rising to the level of truly addressing a need. Some of those major things that Kate alluded to is introducing the needs plan for roadways themselves. So as we went into the 2045 RMP, we had the opportunity to have a little bit more streamlined and kind of surgical list. So rather than opening the floodgates again, we really started from that more pared down list. And that allows us to focus on the things that we know are going to be potentially in greatest need of funding and best competitive for funding. We know that our funding levels continue to decrease, and so we want to be as nimble as possible in promoting those projects that are going to have greatest benefit for our community. So that doesn't mean that we closed the door and didn't look at additional projects. There were certainly the other data points Kate mentioned to you based on newer information that we also pulled in as we identified our plan.
Thanks, Allison. So with that, for our roadway projects, we have a variety of different ones. We've got corridor projects, intersection projects, interchange projects, interstate widening projects, as well as intelligent transportation system, ITS needs. So those are agenda items, and we've attached the agenda items within here. So attachment 1, that begins to show you of the needs plan, the regional roadway projects. So the information we have within the needs plans includes the project, the limits of those projects, the county that it's in, and just kind of a high level improvement. So you can kind of see as we move to attachment 2, some of these safety improvements don't necessarily identify what those safety improvements could be. And that's because they vary based on the location of those projects. And we'll we'll get more into details of those projects outside of the needs plan as it starts moving into the cost feasible. So attachments 1 and 2 really have the details, and attachment 3 has the ITS for the needs plan, a part of the 2040 RMP. Now, the existing plus committed projects, these are projects that were identified, but because that they have funding associated with them, as well as they have funding associated with them, or they're into construction already, these are projects that were removed from the needs plan. So that's what this list shows here, is they've already been prioritized for us. They're already moving forward. So that's why these projects are not going to be seen in the RMP, because we're already working on them and they're moving forward. So that's really what existing plus committed means within the 2045 RMP.
So at this point, yeah, we want to talk a little bit about the project evaluation prioritization. Kate mentioned a moment ago, we're really going to be focusing a lot today on our project. And I want to remind you all, the last time that we had the opportunity to present to the board, we did talk a bit about our bicycle and pedestrian projects and how we had put everything together by looking at our county-specific plans as well. So certainly we're not intending to diminish the importance of our other transportation modes. But I think that as we think about the regional mobility plan and working toward the ultimate development of our cost feasible plan, where we have to go all the way through all those steps is with roadways. We don't have to go all the way through those final steps with, for instance, our transit projects. Our transit projects are things that are actually prioritized and then ultimately talked about with their funding through other funding, through other planning mechanisms. So Star Metro and other transit agencies are planning at their level as well. And then those are ultimately the documents that are going to move those things forward. Whereas we just are more of a reflection of that for the RMP. Similarly for aviation, you'll see later on in this presentation, we'll talk about revenues, but we're not really going to get into that financial constraint. For bicycle and pedestrian, it's a similar situation. We have the opportunity to be nimble and not financially constrain those plans, those projects. Since they are smaller in nature typically, and they're using very specific funding sources for those independent bicycle and pedestrian projects, we actually have the opportunity of saying, hey, you know, let's identify what those are, which we have done through this process. And then as we see the opportunities come available, we can match up those projects as we go along with available funding. So again, just wanted to let everybody know why we're going to be talking a lot about roadways today. So just briefly, let's recap where we've been with project evaluation and prioritization. So as you think about this, it's really kind of a two-step process with project evaluation and prioritization. We want that to kind of set the stage that ultimately leads us into the development of the cost feasible plan. This is not an end unto itself. I don't think I can emphasize that enough with project prioritization. I think that one of the tendencies with project prioritization is to get very keyed in on scores and say, well, you know, this is the end all be all. But ultimately, what we're then going on and doing is looking at the revenue source that matches up with the particular project and then constraining from there. So that's really what the end goal is here, is the cost feasible plan. And we're not going to be getting to the cost feasible plan today because we want to explain essentially all of the background that leads us to that final development of the cost feasible plan. So let's talk about the evaluation criteria first. And this is something that, if you'll recall, back in some of our in-person meetings in what seems like eons ago, I think at this point, we did start having these conversations. And we've had the opportunity to take into account some of your feedback as well as the feedback from our committees as well. But this was a place where we, again, had the benefit of treating this as an update of the 2040 plan. So for those of you all that do recall the 2040 process, we really initiated this priority process through that plan We've carried most of the elements forward, and then we've tweaked it a little bit to be in line with our goals, as well as the new federal legislation and other requirements. So first off, in our roadway evaluation criteria, what this is and why it's in a separate list is this is kind of our first step. This is our screening level. So we take a roadway project forward and we say, let's take it through these 4 things here. We're essentially looking for something that tells us this is a no-brainer. It absolutely does need to go all the way through prioritization, or there are major concerns with this project. We should stop here. We should not go further into prioritization. So things like project phase is completed and being part of an adopted plan tell us this project absolutely should go forward. We already know that this project's been studied and discussed or even potentially partially funded in the past, so we need to be looking at it. Conversely, major national, natural, or social environmental issues may tell us that this is something that we don't want to go further on. Now, this is something that is part of our prioritization process. Just because it's listed separately, I don't want that to confuse the matter. When we look at a total score, this is actually part of that total score for our prioritized projects. So looking at the next slide, this kind of puts everything together. You see the remainder of our prioritization criteria. So in here, you'll see a lot of different things that loop back to the guiding principles that we have for our RMP. Most of these, again, are reflective of the process that we used in the 2040 RMP as well. Things like safety, universal accessibility, growth, congestion reduction, supportive of transit, bicycle, pedestrian, and freight. But there are a few things down at the bottom I want to call your attention to that are newer for this process. One being the support of transportation technology. That's something that wasn't necessarily really being discussed, even when we did this 5 years ago. But we wanted to be sure that it was intentionally incorporated as a part of this effort, and so it is now part of our weighting criteria. Similarly, resiliency. Resiliency is a major part of our guiding principles now, and as such, we wanted to be sure it's intentionally incorporated with our prioritization. And then finally, travel and tourism. Again, both resiliency and travel and tourism are now part of our planning goals at the federal level. So we want to be sure that those are being directly shown, incorporated. So then as we move into the scoring process itself, what you'll see, and this is attachment 5 in your packet, and I think attachment 6 shows the remainder of it as well, is the scores themselves. Now, as we move this into the final RMP document, we would not intend to show the exact scoring within that document, but instead talk about this in more of a high, medium, and low. Again, we don't feel as though the specific scores are incredibly productive for us because we're really just using this as a midpoint to help us work toward the final cost feasible plan development. But we did want you all to be able to see kind of the more detailed analysis that was undertaken here. So you can see this is laid out similarly to how Kate introduced the needs plan for the regional projects, intersection projects, interchange, and interstate projects. One observation I would offer is the projects, it's not really helpful to compare scores across categories. So if you're looking at an intersection project, let's say, compared to an interstate widening project, really difficult to actually look at how the scoring was conducted on those 2 different scales of projects in a similar way. So instead, we would be looking to pull a blend of those different things. And since they're often eligible for different funding sources, it automatically lends itself to that as we progress into the cost feasible plan. So I know we're covering a ton of material today, so I'm going to pause here. Are there any questions that folks have either about the needs plan or about the prioritization process or scoring?
I guess anybody that knows me can see Wakulla was ranked pretty low But I talked to Allison, and she's convinced me not to throw a hissy fit until we see the cost feasible plan. Anybody?
I'll make one comment on that, Randy, and it will become more evident later on, but I believe that one thing that is potentially going to be undertaken is splitting one of the Crawfordville Road projects into 2 segments.
Correct.
When we get into the costs, what you'll observe is one of them has a very high cost number, which is not going to be realistic. So we're looking at more of a logical break point and to putting that into 2 projects. So when that is done, the 2 individual segments would be rescored. So just kind of throwing that out there.
Greg, when's the appropriate time to do that, the split?
I believe since we're basing this on our annual priorities process that you'll all be reviewing and approving or voting on next month, I think that would be the time to do it. We would then take that and make that adjustment to what will be the draft cost feasible at that time and then move that out for public comment.
Just for the other board members' edification, I told the executive committee this, but I talked to DOT. The section of 319 through Crawfordville is enormously expensive. So we talked about splitting it in half and just trying to get it done half at a time, which is much more feasible. So that's what's hopefully going to be coming back. Okay, Allison, go ahead.
Thanks, Randy. All right, so the next step after we have our prioritization completed is to move into getting the puzzle pieces started to put together for our cost feasible plan. So we have to look at kind of both sides of our equation. First, our project revenues, and then our project costs. So a little bit of background on our project revenues. We're taking a look at our state and local expenditures, as well as our current funding trends and our future funding levels. These are shown in future year dollars, which I know is not always the easiest thing to digest everything in because it makes things look a little bit rosier as you go out into the future when in fact it's just inflation that is doing that for us. We definitely do include blueprint and other things that may be coming through the CIPs as a part of this. And one thing I'll just note, because I know that it was a question that came up as we discussed with our committees, is future funding levels is a big question right now. It's always a question when we get into RMPs. These are certainly an inexact science as we get into trying to think what's going to happen 25 years from now in terms of transportation funding. But I'd say right now is one of those bigger question mark times. It harkens back to the recession when we were asking ourselves similar questions about how things were going to rebound and was there going to be some additional funding source or something that might come online to help stem the drain on resources. And I think we're all in a little bit of a question mark with COVID, and just asking folks. We've had the opportunity to do this in several places around the country. I think there's definitely a mixed response that I've been hearing about a sense of recovery time and degree of impact, whether it's going to be a large short-term impact but a quick recovery, or maybe a milder, longer-term impact, or none of those. Maybe it's something else entirely. So difficult for us to really home in on that. It's something that makes us all the more fortunate that these RMPs are redone every 5 years. So I think the thing that I take away from it is that regardless of what the funding level will be, the order that we put our projects in as we start to assign them to various different funding tiers is still beneficial because it still conveys how the MPO, how this region wants things to progress. So even if our revenue levels end up being at a lower level than we thought they might be, well, then it may just mean that we're a couple of fiscal year slower than we thought we were going to be, but we can still preserve some of that general order. Let's say maybe another stimulus package comes online, then maybe we're actually able to accelerate some of that. So it's really kind of thinking about that grouping and ordering that I think is still beneficial regardless of what our future funding levels look like. So with all of that said, we wanted to just give you guys a little bit of a sense of what revenue categories we're going to be focusing in on for our various different transportation modes, because we do look at our revenues for all of our different travel modes just to make sure that we have a source for this. And in your packet, you have some information that was actually provided by FDOT. FDOT does provide revenue estimates for federal and state funding for all of the MPO areas actually across the state. All 27 MPOs have that information provided to them. So it's a nice, strong starting point for us. But as we look at the different revenue categories, I want to call your attention first off to our revenue bands. So you'll see them over on the left. So first, 2021 to 2025, we look at that first cost band really representing some of the things that are mostly going to be committed projects that already have funding obligated. But then going beyond that, we continue at 5-year increments, 2026 to 2030, 2031 to 2035, and then our final year, just to note, is actually 10 years long. So it's a 10-year cost band. The feds actually encourage us to do that because the degree of uncertainty increases quite a bit as we get out to that final band in our RMPs. So if you see that number being bigger, don't let it fool you. But thinking about roadways, we're really looking at 3 major categories here. First, our strategic intermodal system, which, as you all know, can only really be leveraged for a small subset of roadways within the region. Your other arterials funding, that's kind of the bulk of your state and federal funding for most of your roadways in the area. And then the Blueprint and local funding. And we did work with Blueprint to kind of understand what percentage of their money has been going toward roadway type projects, and then tried to use that to project that out going forward. So also looking at bicycle and pedestrian. So 2 major funding sources where this comes from. You'll see the transportation management area direct allocation funds. So these are those funds that come to CRTPA directly, and they can be a little bit more nimble with how those funds are ultimately allocated because they don't have to be filtered first through FDOT. And then second, you'll see the Blueprint and local funding portion for bicycle and pedestrian. So just something to note here, and I think you'll see this in a couple of different slides here, but just an observation for you. And the Blueprint local here is a good example. You'll notice that the dollar amounts as you get further out are lower. They are being inflated. All of these are year of expenditure revenues. So when you see things that are staying the same or are getting less as you go out, it means our spending power is decreasing. So that's just something to call your attention to as we go through that. Indeed, we are expecting a decline in some instances. Transit, again, this comes from FDOT, just looking at the capital and operating budgets for the transit agencies in this area. And then finally, aviation, just breaking that down for Tallahassee and Quincy. And something I'll just note, and this is more true for aviation and for transit, is that if there are any major capital projects that were to come online, like let's say a new runway extension or a new transfer facility or maintenance facility, those wouldn't necessarily be reflected in these. That would likely be a separate line item that would ultimately be added and have a fairly substantial impact on the individual year or multiple years funding sources. So just something to note there. Any questions on revenues before I move to project costs?
You're good.
All right, project costs then. So our project costs come from a blend of sources where there are feasibility studies or other studies that have been done for projects. We just try to start with that because it typically allows us a little bit more detailed look at a project's cost. But where we don't have that, we use FDOT District 3 unit cost information, and that allows us to kind of go in and almost build a street based on the characteristics of what we expect to have as a part of that particular improvement. So with all of that put together, you'll see on the next slide, our attachment, it's shown in attachments 8, I think 9, 10, and 11, but broken out by our different roadway types, you'll see our cost estimates. And I just want to point something out on this attachment here, because this is for our regional roadway projects. To just have some helpful context, we've shown these by the phase that they would be starting in. We also provide the county. Here we also included the existing and future levels of service. Now these are taken directly from our travel demand model for the region. Just a little bit of context to help understand some of the congestion levels that are being experienced in these locations. And then the project costs. These are current year dollar project costs. The reason why is that we have not put them into the cost feasible plan yet. When they are actually matched up to a particular funding tier, we'll be inflating these costs as well. If you're trying to do any accounting in your head and you see the cumulative costs here, they're going to look a lot better than they will when we actually get them into the cost feasible plan, because we're going to have a whole bunch of inflation tacked onto these. So then we have them for our intersection projects as well. If you can go back one on the intersections, one thing that I'll just observe here is we are well aware that not all of our intersections are going to cost the exact same amount of money to do. But for many of these at the RMP level, we're at such a high planning level that we're not able to get into the granularity of each intersection to really understand exactly which mitigation measures might be appropriate. Where we do have that level of detail and we know that it's going to exceed that of a typical intersection improvement, you'll see that we have greater project costs. And those are kind of more significant intersection improvements that are shown on a few of these. But elsewhere, we've just assumed kind of a constant $500,000 because we feel that accounts for a few different small-scale intersection improvements being conducted at a single intersection. And then we have our interstate projects and our interchange projects. Similarly here, I find this one almost a little bit funny because these really run the gamut. We have some very large project costs here and some very relatively small project costs. And what you're seeing here are things that are more akin to small intersection improvements all the way up to large interchange constructions. So there truly is a huge degree of variability in what we're talking about with these interchange projects. So are there any questions on the cost?
So Chair, I have a quick question.
Go ahead, Kristen.
So this is a lot of information, so thank you all for putting this together and walking us through it. Just the interstate costs. So you've got a notation there, caution for the improvements is a combined $405 million, right? So that's, am I seeing the proposed Welaunee entrance? Are both of those at Welaunee? That's the question. It's not the other Thomasville Road exit. Is that correct?
Looks like they're both at Thomasville, Kristen. Welaunee separate.
That's right. It's just different portions of the same interchange. I think they were just kind of called out to show the eastbound and westbound.
Okay.
Yeah, Commissioner Dozier, Welanie's listed the last one on that list at I-10 at 33.7 million.
I saw Welani at the bottom. Sorry, Greg. I asked the question. I asked the wrong question. That was, yes. I did see Welani at the end, but I guess the question, when I read this through first, I thought the first two were pointing to Welani because that would be a new interchange. The 405, if I'm not mistaken, that cost may be based on additional flyovers and all kinds of new infrastructure, some of which we had hoped would be off the table if we had a new interchange of Welani. So I guess the same question is going for the intersection improvements, that 46 million at Tennessee Street and Mahan. Am I right in thinking that some of these costs are based on some plans, some ideas we had years ago, and we may have already indicated that we don't want to move forward in that same direction, or we're waiting on more information? Does that make more sense? Is that?
Yes, ma'am. And we can go back and check on Thomasville. I'm not sure. But yeah, let us go back and check.
Going back to where we expanded the initial study from the Thomasville Road and Capitol Circle interchange to include the proposed new Welani interchange, our hope was that that would reduce the amount of work that needed to happen at Thomasville Road. So I think that is a pretty big one that stood out. The 46 million, I just wondered if that was tunnels under Mahan, which keeps being floated, but I'm not sure we're ever going to get there. So those are just rather large numbers, so I want to make sure we fully understand them. And I appreciate it. Yeah. That was it, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Kristen. Any other comments, questions? Hey, Allison?
Thank you. So I realize that we've given you all the ingredients of the cake, and we put the cake in the oven and it smells great, but we're not going to let you have any cake this month. But next month, we will be bringing you the draft cost feasible plan that actually has all of these things put together and the final outcome shown. But we wanted to make sure that we really have this opportunity to intentionally walk through all of the steps that lead up to that, which we would typically do over the span of several different meetings. So we appreciate everyone's patience in going through a large amount of material in a short amount of time. So thank you again. And Kate's going to walk us through the remainder of our upcoming next steps.
Thanks, Allison. So really for the rest of this month is we're going to continue to work on the project costs, and like Allison said, start to develop that draft cost feasible plan so we can present that next month. In September as well, we're going to have the next public engagement opportunity. So this is going to be virtual. We're working on that now. We'll make sure that it doesn't coincide with the m.cores meeting. So that was good to hear that they were going to have meeting number 8 the week of September 21st at some point. So that's really going to be going out to the public, having some virtual presentation to allow folks to understand the process, understand where we are in the process, and give folks opportunities to look at the prioritized projects, draft cost feasible plan, and provide us any final input they would like to provide us. So there will probably be a couple nights that we'll host that towards the end of September. And then in October, we'll finalize that draft Connections 2040 Regional Mobility Plan for an adoption in November. And with that, I think we'll take any other questions.
All right, Kristen, fire away.
Thank you, Caitlin and Allison. Really appreciate that. I'll say that on behalf of our chairman. Contrary to popular belief, I don't always have questions. You all have done a great job. I think this is an exceptionally difficult way to give this presentation. And since I'm given the opportunity, I will also say this is what we're really talking about, what we're hearing from a lot of constituents about the m.cores process. And this is a statement for the board, not for Caitlin and Allison. I know I don't want to drag you into that piece of it, but we start the needs assessment really early. We start all of these things really early.
Sure.
this is how we're supposed to do it. And this is what kind of concerns some of us on m.cores, is that we're not starting in the same way as we would on our MPOs. So it was interesting timing to hear this presentation immediately after our m.cores presentation. I just wanted to tie those two together. But thank you all very much. I look forward to the next one.
On pins and needles, waiting on that cost feasible list, Allison.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir, go ahead.
I just wanted to say I'm glad to see that the widening of Orange Avenue from Spring Hill to Capitol Circle Southwest is continuing to move forward. That's something that has certainly been a priority for me since I've served on this board, and it goes back even further than that. I don't want to get into that whole story, but I'm glad to see that is a priority project, and it is it continues to move forward in this process.
Okay, any other comments?
Oh, Mr. Chairman, one other question that I did have. At one point, we discussed the widening of Orange Avenue from South Adams to Spring Hill. Do we know where that is now in the process?
Mr. Chairman, you may take that one.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
Commissioner Richardson, it's under, I believe, if it hasn't started design, it will here shortly. I know design is funded, but that's probably about an 18-month process to get through that. DOT also has to finish up the project development environmental study on that as well.
Okay, I knew they had started the what was it you just said? I'm blanking on.
Project PD&E, Project Development Environmental.
Yes.
Yeah.
I knew that had started, but I just didn't know where they were with the PD&E and getting that completed. So that's about done, and then we're about to move into design.
Design, yes, sir. And that's one of the things we were planning on doing. They've broken out the design into a couple of segments. The first one being from Monroe to Spring Hill Road. We're actually planning on asking them to extend that a little further to the west to incorporate Lake Bradford Road. That way we can pick up the Liberty Park area that we talked about with the sidewalks and things like that. And then the other piece would be from Lake Bradford west to Capitol Circle, but that is not funded yet for design.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, well, yes, I don't have anything else on this, but I do have a question later on.
Okay, you want to set under items from CRT board members? Or is it relevant to this?
Yes. I just wanted to ask for a copy of the PowerPoint from the previous presentation on the m.cores. Can we get a copy of that?
Yes, sir. They provided it to us, so we'll send it out to everybody after the meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all I had.
Thank you, Allison.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Kristen.
Greg, if you will include a link to the Suncoast Parkway to the m.cores website, I had referenced the GIS maps, and I think folks might be interested in seeing the work product. Again, no matter where this project goes, we've got a really good start at that data collection. So Commissioner Richardson, thanks for asking for the presentation. I'd like that too. But if you can include the link, I think that will help.
Good idea.
Thanks.
And we'll include that also too. And Commissioner Minor referenced the Florida Tax Watch report. I actually was not aware of that until it showed up in one of the meetings. One of the public comments that we got. We'll include that as well, because that was a very interesting read.
It was.
Okay.
Excellent. Okay, DOT report.
Mr. Chairman, my understanding is, Donna, correct me if I'm wrong, the DOT has nothing to add today.
I'm here, Greg.
Okay. Did you have anything? Or?
No, Mr. Chairman, we do not have anything to add today.
All right. Okay. Executive Director, if you have anything.
Yes, I've got a few things actually today. I want to start it off on a good bit of news. We've learned in the last few weeks from DOT that we have about $2 million in SU dollars in current year that we need to allocate. So we'll be bringing back to you a list of recommendations next month where to spend that money, and that's typically the money that we use on the smaller localized projects. So we're based on some of our priority lists. We're putting together a list of recommended projects to use that money on.
This is what kind of money, Greg?
SU, that's the pot that Allison referred to during the conversation. Usually it's about $3.8 million per year. In the past, it's gone to things like the Coastal Trail. Some of it has been used on some highway projects, but for whatever reason, we wound up with about $2 million that we did not know was available. Again, that we'll be looking to bring back a plan to expend that money to you next month.
It's always welcome in Wakulla, just saying.
On the bad news side, and I tried to work this into the m.cores presentation because I'm not sure that it's going to have an impact or not. But we learned last week, that the Transportation Revenue Estimating Conference has reduced DOT's anticipated revenues over the next 5 years by $1.5 billion, just shy of that. And that represents, I think, somewhere about 8 to 10% of DOT's 5-year work program. So that's a pretty significant hit. And, whether or not that has an impact on the m.cores remains to be seen. But that was a huge hit. I don't think I've ever seen one quite that large. And again, where that goes from there, we don't know. They'll still
Is that revenue derived from gas tax?
Gas tax is the primary. There's a few other places that it comes from. There's also in various pots. They're kind of generally labeled growth management funds. They're expecting the estimates on that in the next couple of weeks, and that may have further impact on the 5-year work program. So we'll just have to wait and see.
Okay.
A couple of other things. Just wanted you to note, it's in your packet today. We've had to move the September and November meetings to Monday, September 21st and November 23rd due to various conflicts. And again, that's reflected in your updated schedule. I wanted to thank Yolanda and Suzanne. As you noticed, you all received your public comment on the m.cores Friday night about 10 o'clock. So I want to say thanks to them for staying up late and putting all those together.
Yes.
And the one other thing I did want to touch on m.cores, there was a lot of discussion about the process, and this one's definitely a unique one. I will tell you there's a little bit of precedence in that. I'm going to date myself here a bit, but back in the 90s on the extension, what was called the Northern Extension of the Florida Turnpike, it was actually statutorily mandated to go to Lebanon Station up on US 19. That stayed in there for a few years, but eventually came out. As we talked about earlier, I think patience right now is prudent to kind of see how this thing plays out and what they come back with. And Mr. Chairman, I believe that's all I had.
Okay, there's no citizen comment. Are there any items from CRTPA board members?
Question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Oh, gosh, I just lost my train of thought. Oh, my goodness. Hey, go to somebody else. It may come back. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Oh, geez. Yeah, okay.
Anybody?
Yeah.
Curtis, save it till next time then.
Okay. I guess I'll have to.
All right, if nobody has anything else, we're adjourned, and I enjoyed it.
Great meeting, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Have a good one all.